Hi guys, my name's Doug. Welcome to My Messy Garage. Today's video we're going to be working on the 1979 Corvette C3. The last couple of videos we've got it fire up and run for a little while. We replaced the starter because that wasn't working really well, and we put new spark plugs in it. Today it's time to potentially deal with the elephant in the room, look at the carburetor. Here on the table you can see a couple of carburetors. This one is labeled as being off my 1981 Camaro. The 81 Camaro Z28 had a 5.7 liter or 350 small block in it. So this is potentially a good carburetor to try on the Corvette. This carburetor, I have no idea what it's off of. Similar idea, although it has the manifold heated choke, so it won't directly bolt on without swapping the choke assembly over. I think what we're going to do today, first off, is we'll pull this carburetor off, we'll clean this one up, and we'll give them a good look over and see if we can see anything obvious that is going to prevent us from giving this one a try. Then we'll bolt this one on and see what it does. Now, I have absolutely no idea when the last time fuel ran through this carburetor was, and I don't have a rebuild kit for it. So it's entirely possible it could be a complete piece of crap. But we already know that the carburetor that's on the car is a complete piece of crap, so this is worth giving a try. Before we get going tearing things apart, we should document what we've got going on here a little bit. We've got our choke lead. This carburetor is supposed to be a manifold heated choke, but I've converted it over to be electric choke because using the Vortec heads and the Performer intake, it doesn't have an exhaust crossover and there's no provision for heat to heat the choke assembly like there is on the factory manifold. We have our vacuum lead that goes over to the brake booster here. This appears to be a PCV valve, and another vacuum port that goes down into the emission system there somewheres. This is the port that hooked up to the vacuum advance. I won't guarantee you that this is hooked up completely correct. It is entirely possible that I've got something mixed up here, but this is as near as I can tell how things are supposed to be done. We have another vacuum port at the front that I think is going into the chassis. This car uses vacuum in the HVAC system and also requires vacuum to adjust the headlight doors. I believe it's vacuum to close. And since my headlight doors stay closed, that tells me there isn't a leak in that vacuum system. There's also a fuel canister down behind the brake booster over there that would have vacuum on it. And there was at one time a vacuum assist on the heat riser valve, which closed off the right-hand exhaust so that all of the exhaust gas would go across through the heads intake manifold and back down through the driver's side exhaust system. However, because again we're using Vortec heads that don't have the provision for that, all of that has been blocked off and disabled. So we've got a vacuum assembly here that's part of the gooseneck for the thermostat, and it is just sitting here loose, not connected to anything. Over on the other side we've got our throttle cable coming in. We've got a accelerator system for the cruise control, vacuum operated. We've got the kickdown cable down at the bottom for the transmission, and some return springs. Most of that will be staying with the car. This bracket across the back unbolts and will just stay with the vehicle. We'll have to disconnect those cables and whatnot from the carburetor so that we can remove it easily. We have an idle stop solenoid. I'm not exactly sure how that works, but solenoid, I think it kind of kicks it into fast idle when the air conditioning is on, but I could be wrong about that. This car is well, it's kind of a luxury cruiser. We've got air, we've got cruise, we've got tilt, we've got tele, and an automatic transmission. Hopefully we can get all of that working properly. Let me grab some wrenches and we'll undo the bolts that hold everything together and undo the clips that hold all the cables in place, and we'll see if we can get this carburetor to come off. Now the main bolts here that hold this on are the 1/2 inch. And we have one smaller one because I made a size mistake at one time. Long story we don't need to go into, but entirely my fault. Over on this side, we've got these little clips. They got a keyhole shape on the back side and a retainer clip goes across the front. I'm going to be careful we don't break these because I don't have any spares. That's the cruise control rod and the throttle. And theoretically we should be able to just pull the kickdown cable off. It has a long long keyhole shaped opening in it, and it's being difficult. We'll get the springs, throttle springs off. With just a little bit of a push, we're able to get the kickdown cable off. Pull the connector off for the idle solenoid. This one's already kind of loose. Come out of there fairly easily. And the fuel is being stiff. There we are. A little bit of fuel leaking, but that's to be expected. My favorite temporary label, vacuum advance. You guys don't need to watch me go through and label all this stuff. I'll bring you back when I've got the carburetor over on the bench. So we've got our two carburetors sitting on the bench here. This is the Corvette, this is the Camaro. We've got some minor differences. We don't have the idle solenoid, but again, I think that's air conditioning related. Although I thought the Camaro had air conditioning, I might be wrong. It's been a while since I've looked at it. We've got our post that sticks out that the cruise control attaches to. Again, there's no cruise control on this car or on this carburetor. Everything else on this side looks like it should work for testing purposes at least. If I really wanted to, I could move the cruise control post over. It is just on a threaded bolt and there's a hole in this arm for it, and likewise the solenoid could attach to these holes here. There's a vacuum port at the back that is capped off on this one, and it is not included on this carburetor, but again I got it capped off, so I don't know whether that means anything. Out at the front we've got this large one, smaller one, smaller one, this smaller one, and this smaller one. There's a cap on this one, although the cap is cracked. Big one on the bottom, big one on the bottom. That part should work. Let's take a look at the chokes. Both are electric choke. They are adjusted slightly differently, but for the most part, it looks like it should work. So my plan is, we'll set this one aside, leave it just as it is for now. We're going to take some parts washing spray this down. I got a parts brush, some paper towel. We'll kind of give it a once over, wipe down, and make it look somewhat presentable. Check it over, make sure there's nothing glaring wrong with it, and then we'll bolt it on and see how it does. I'll grab a part can of brake and parts cleaner, give it a little wipe down here. The car that this carburetor came off of is a 1981 Camaro Z28. I do still have the car. The engine block is sitting over that way in the corner, and it's kind of one of those someday projects. I do have ownership on it. Quite honestly, we bought the car because we were going to try using this carb on a project that a friend of mine had at the time, and we didn't end up actually using it. His engine was a 307, so a 350 jetted carburetor probably would not have worked all that well. He ended up getting a Quadrajet off of a 305 equipped car, and for the most part it worked quite well. Now, I'm not super concerned about making this carburetor perfect, simply because even if the Corvette runs perfect with this carburetor installed, I'm going to take it apart and put a carb kit in it. Interestingly, there appears to be caps over top of the idle mixture adjustments. I'm assuming that is some kind of emissions BS, and if we took those caps off we could probably find adjusters underneath there, but again, we're not all that concerned at this particular time. For those that are interested, this is the lower performer manifold. If I recall correctly, when I purchased this, there's two versions. The other version was a little bit taller, and it also had a notch in between, so it acted more like a single plane manifold at higher RPM, a little bit more performance out of it. This was the lower profile and lower performance version. But unfortunately, with the Corvette having such a restricted hood height, in order to use the factory air cleaner, I had to go with the lower performing version. But at the same time, the type of driving I'm doing with this car is strictly, street type of thing. It's nice to be able to stab on the gas pedal and have it throw you back in the seat a little bit, but I'm not racing this car at all. So having this style of manifold is perfectly acceptable. I'm going to put some of this on the carburetor base gasket just because the top layer of the paper kind of ripped a little bit. I think it would probably seal just fine, but what the heck. We've got it, we may as well use it. And for those of you who are interested, this Loctite product, Aviation Gasket Sealant, is the same stuff that BRP used to sell as Envinrude gasket sealing compound. So if you're working on outboard motors and you want to have the correct BRP gasket sealing compound, this is what they use. Because you can no longer buy the genuine BRP stuff because with BRP no longer making Envinrude outboards, they are, I believe, trying to pare down some of their product SKUs. And we'll set that Camaro carburetor down in place. Okay, that is snugged up. That's our chassis vacuum, that's the PCV valve. Up our brakes. Now, I don't have a very good connection on the choke on the Corvette carburetor. I'm just using I've trimmed this fitting down so that a standard spade connector fits on it. This is a special connector that I don't have on this car, so we will make do without it. This is just a standard spade connector for the other side, but not a big deal. Throttle connects up easy, kick down cable connects up easy, and return springs connect up easy. Now we do have one vacuum port over here that doesn't have a cover on it. I think I had we have a kind of sort of homemade vacuum cap that I pulled off of the carburetor that I have no idea where it came from. So I'll put that on that empty port. So now, in theory, we should be able to fire this thing up. Of course, the float bowl is empty on this carburetor because it hasn't run in several years. So I'll have to crank it a little bit to get some fuel up in there, but given that the other one was running fairly okay, it shouldn't be a big issue. We'll fire this up and see what it does. If it also is running really rich, I'll have to dig out the manual and confirm where these vacuum hoses all are supposed to connect up, because there's not a lot else it could be. Well, I guess I'm kind of an idiot. I have a sneaking suspicion the problems that I've been having since I set this thing up was vacuum. I had the vacuum advance hooked up over on this side. Look in the manual, it's supposed to be hooked up to this port over here. Unfortunately, my hose is not long enough, and I don't believe I have any vacuum hose in the cupboard. I'm going to have to make do with what I've got. I've got some hoses that weren't being used for anything here on the front of the engine, and I've pulled one of those off, and now I will see what I can do about making it reach where it needs to go. For testing purposes, I put a piece of heat shrink as a coupler between those two pieces of vacuum hose. We use a cap on the one that isn't being used. This vacuum port is supposed to go down to the heat riser valve, I believe. The one that we were using for the vacuum advance is actually supposed to go to the EGR valve and to the fuel canister, which we now have. Let's see if this thing works better now. Might be a good idea to not have the choke 12 volt shorting out against the manifold when we've got a fuel leak going on. It appears our filter housing is puking fuel all over the place. I can't have that. Well, we're still getting a little bit of smoke out of the back here, but I don't think it's anywhere near as bad as it was. I'm kind of confused what's going on here now. This carburetor is also running really, really rich. It's not running real smooth. Almost like we've got a cylinder or two that isn't firing. I'm wondering maybe if we've got a bad spark plug lead. These are relatively new leads, but I think they were fairly cheap ones when I put them on. If we've got one or two cylinders that aren't firing, that could very well explain why we're getting raw gas out the exhaust. By the time I shut this thing off, it was burning my eyes so bad I couldn't be in here anymore. Seems kind of strange to me that we've got two Quadrajet carburetors that are both running really, really rich. That doesn't necessarily mean that there's not something wrong with both of them, but it kind of leads me to think there's something else going on here. Let me flip through the manual and we'll see if we can figure anything else out. Done a little bit of research, checked a few things online, kind of confirms a few of the suspicions that I have. There's a few common things that could be causing this carburetor to run rich. Could be the idle mixture, which is down here at the front of the carburetor. There's screws that you can usually adjust. This carburetor is relatively factory, and so nobody's removed the plugs to access those adjustment screws. My Quadrajet that came on this car has those caps removed, but from the factory they were set so that people couldn't get in there and monkey with them and damage their engine. So that's one thing that could be causing this to run rich, is the idle mixture. The next item is the choke, but the choke was definitely opening up quite nicely. When we first came back here after I shut the car down, the choke blade was open. The next item that could be causing it, and this I think is quite likely what's going on, the needle and seat, which is attached to the float, which governs how much fuel is sitting in the reservoir inside the carburetor. And if the needle and seat is not good, or if the float is saturated, or if the float is hanging up or whatever, it could be getting too much fuel into the carburetor and therefore dumping raw fuel down the throat of the carburetor. And the next item that could cause rich running condition on a Quadrajet carburetor is there are metal plugs on the bottom. I believe they call them wells, and if those plugs start leaking, they could also cause raw fuel to be running down into the throat of the carburetor. This carburetor is very much of an unknown quantity. The car that I got it on was an 81 Camaro, and the engine was blown up in it. The engine had been run without a water pump belt on it and cooked the engine pretty good. The valves were stuck in the heads, that kind of thing. The carburetor should still have been functional, but it has sat on the shelf for I'm gonna say close to 20 years. So who knows whether the tip of that needle has dried up and is no longer working, that kind of thing. Here we have ported vacuum. This ported vacuum is used for the advance on the distributor. The only time this sees vacuum is when the throttle is open. This hose, I just put this on, runs to the vacuum advance on the distributor. The vacuum advance on the distributor is maintaining vacuum. I pull a vacuum on it and This moves here in the distributor. The diaphragm inside of the vacuum and vents moves, and we don't have a constant source of air. Down here on the bottom we have, and I'm not entirely sure where this goes, but it's a manifold vacuum fitting on the bottom of the carburetor. This here is also a manifold vacuum. It goes in and has a passageway that goes down to the base plate of the carburetor. This here is likewise a manifold vacuum. It's on the base plate of the carburetor. At the back we have this fitting, which I have capped off, which is a manifold vacuum. Here we have, I believe this is for the headlights, this is to the transmission, and here we have the brakes. Well guys, I think we're going to end this one here. Not a real satisfying point to end the video off. I realize that. Not a whole lot of conclusion to anything that we've been working on, but it does have a lot of good information in it. Check back again. The next segment we do on this, I think I've got the issue sorted out, and also I think we've got the timing issue that we've been chasing sorted out as well. So be sure to check back for the next installment of the Corvette Resurrection. Remember to like, subscribe, leave me a comment if you like what I'm doing, or hey, if you have any suggestions on how I can do better, I'd like to hear that too. Thanks a lot for watching, and we'll catch you in the next mess.